Hey everyone, it's time to start a new section. And in this section, we are going to talk about DOM and events. And I'm going to start with understanding BOM and DOM. BOM means browser object model and DOM is document object model. So these two important objects we are going to talk about in this video. So as I said, BOM stands for browser object model and DOM stands for document object model. And you see this, both of this have object word in it. Actually, both of them are objects and we know objects has properties and methods. So it's a good news for us, right? So let's start with the browser object model. So I'm going to focus on right hand side, this browser window. This entire browser window, we can access this entire browser window using JavaScript. And for that, we have an object that is provided by the browser. So actually when we start a browser, browser gives us an access to an object called window. So I'm going to open my console. And actually, this window or this browser window, I can access this browser window using something called window. So if I type this, see that? This entire window is an object and it has all of these properties and methods. See that? So many properties and methods. And some of the properties or some of the methods we have already used, right? This alert. Remember this alert? It actually opens a window. So say suppose, I want to open a window. So I can directly write all of my JavaScript inside this console window. I can write it in the script block here on the left hand side. And even I can use this console window to write all of the JavaScript. So I'm going to write alert. You can write something like this. You can write alert, but actually behind the scene, it's a window method. So when I type window alert, and I can say hello BOM, and if I press enter, see that I got the alert window open directly in my browser. I can use other methods of window, like we talked about. There's one method called, if I scroll down, this prompt method, let's try to use this prompt method. So I can call window dot prompt and I can ask for a question here. Please tell me, or maybe I'll go simple, what's your name, question mark. And maybe if I press enter, see that it's opening a pop-up and asking for a name. I'll enter my name and press OK. We got the output also here, right? So this window object, it got lots of properties and methods. And I mean, we can't learn all of this in a day or maybe in a years, it will take a lot of time to learn all of these properties and methods. And this on, abort, on, after print, these are all the events. And we are going to talk about events also in this section. So I'm going to cover some of the objects in this video. So window is object, and inside window, we have something called, we have this history object. And this is really interesting object, this is something new for you, object inside object. So I can give you example, we know how to create objects. So I have created a person object previously, if you remember, and we have provided different properties, like I'll create John, and then John's age might be 30. Okay, but I can have objects inside object. So I can create one more object inside person object. Maybe I can go with address object, and this address is going to have more properties. City, I'll go with New York maybe. Then I can have a street, some street, maybe something like this. See that? So I can have nested object inside the parent object. Similarly, window is an object, and this window object has more object. So one of the object I was talking about, is a history object. So we can access this history object to capture the browsing history of a user. So let me maximize my browser for some time. And here, I'm going to open console, and we are going to use a history object, So I'm going to visit Google first. So I'm going to type Google. Okay. And then I'm going to go here and I'll type. Okay, then I'll go into my console. I'm going to type window dot. Let's try to access the history and see what we get. See, we got length 2, right? Now we have length 2. Now I'll go to amazon.com. Okay, again, I'll try to access window dot history. See that? Now the length is 3 because, initially I went to Google. At the time we got the length of 2. Then I went to amazon.com, and now the length is 3. Now we can use this history object as history is object, it has properties like the length property, and it got methods as well. So, we have methods like go, then we have methods like back, forward. I can use all of these methods. So let me try to call window dot history dot back method, and you just focus on the browser here. If I press enter, see that? It's like pressing on this back button. I can move forward also using this history object, window dot history dot forward. Enter. See that? So browser object model, this window object has provided us a lot of important objects which we can use to control the browser. Similarly, we have other objects like, let's talk about an object called navigator. This navigator object, it has different properties and methods. So you see here, it basically provides the information about my browser. So if you see here, you can see the app code name, which is Mozilla, app name is Netscape. Then this is the app version where, they have mentioned like it is a Chrome browser and what is the version of the browser. So this is also interesting, even it's providing me the language information, right? So there are a lot of properties and methods which we can explore inside these objects. On the similar line, I got one more important object which I would like to share with you. Is called a screen object. Now the screen object, it got some of the important properties which are related to my screen, right? So it's giving me like available height. Then, you can check for the height. So what is the height of my browser? And it's also giving us, the width of the browser. So all of these properties, which we use while writing our JavaScript programs. So if you're writing a program where you need to interact with the screen, right? So you're going to use the screen object, or maybe you need to work with history. You're going to use a history object. So as I said, we have so many objects here, and all of those objects have so many properties and methods, and we can't learn all of these in one video, and it is going to take years to explain all of them. So you need to take a call, So whenever you have a requirement, you just need to Google it and try to search for specific object as per your project requirement. Now let's talk about one of the most important object that we are interested in here. That's called this document object. And as I mentioned, let me minimize this. As I mentioned, we are going to talk about DOM, right? Document object model. And this object is really important in terms of JavaScript. And this is the object which you are going to interact with most of the time while writing your JavaScript programs. So what is DOM? DOM is basically this. If I go to the Elements tab, you see here, right? This HTML, this head tag, this body, and inside the body, I have this H1 element, even the script element. So this entire HTML structure you see here is actually an object. And this is DOM. So when the HTML page is loaded in the browser, it actually converts all of these elements, this HTML, this head, this title, this body, this h1, this script, everything it converts into an object, and we call that object document object model. So as it is object, we know objects have properties and methods. So I can see what properties and methods this DOM has, right? So I'm going to use one command here. So I'm going to open my console. I'm going to clear this one. And this time I'm going to access document directly, something like this. So I can access document semicolon, and you see this, we are getting the output. We are getting entire HTML document in the console window, but but you can't see the properties and methods here, right? As I said, this document has properties and methods, but we can't see all of those properties and method. So if you want to see the properties and method of the DOM object, we can use console.dir command. Okay, and here I'm going to pass the document. Enter. See that? Now this command, this console.dir command, it actually converted the document into an object. Okay, so it has all the properties and methods, right? This is URL property, which is like this one, this part, right? This is URL of the application, I would say, right? We got all means all the HTML element. We have HTML, we have head, title, body, h1, script. See that? I told you all of these things, all of these nodes, all of these HTML elements are actually objects. So this all property represent all of these elements. Then we have all the anchors in my application. Then the applet, space URI, BG color, body. So we got all of these properties, And as we have seen in case of window, we had a lot of properties. Similarly, we have a lot of properties here also. I want to show you some of the methods which we are going to use. Like if I expand this proto property, inside that, if I expand more into my document, you see we have some of the methods here which we are going to use to access and modify the DOM. So there are methods like, this get element by ID, get element by class name, get element by name. These are some of the methods which we are going to use to access and modify the DOM. So as I said, this DOM is a really important object, and this entire section is dedicated to DOM. So we are going to see like how we can access different HTML elements, how we can access this h1 element, how we can modify the text inside this h1 element, right? We can access attributes, we can access properties of all of these elements. So we are basically going to use the power of all the languages like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. So we are going to discuss about how to access this DOM and how to modify the DOM in the upcoming videos. So I'm going to see you in the next video. Hey everyone, we are at a stage, where the exciting part of JavaScript is going to start. So in this video, we are going to talk about accessing and manipulating DOM. This is where, JavaScript is going to get exciting, and we are going to create user interfaces using JavaScript. So first of all, we are going to start with manipulating the UIs, and later we will see how we can create user interfaces using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. So let's get started. Okay, so for this video, I have created a simple HTML structure which will help us to understand accessing and manipulating DOM element in a simpler manner. So I have created a simple to-do app, I can say, where you see, right, we have a title here, my task, and this is a text input using which we can add a new task in our task list. So I already have some of the tasks listed here, and I can add a new task by entering something here, some task, and then clicking on this add one button. So right now this application is doing nothing, but in this section, we are going to build this application in its entirety. Coming back to the HTML structure, it's really easy. Actually, I have divided my body into two different sections. One is a header. So this is a header. You see that I have a different color here. and then there is a section which contains all the list of tasks. So I'm using UL here, and then all the list of elements inside that particular UL, and all of these LIs contain our task. Okay, cool. So let's first try to understand the parts of a HTML element. This HTML element, or we call it HTML node. So most of the HTML element, they start with a node name and they end with a node name. Okay, some of the HTML elements, they can end with / something like this also, but in most of the cases, the HTML elements has a start node and the end node, and they both are similar. Then this part, this is called a text node. So for this H2 element, this is a text node. This is where, we put our text, and this H2 we can call it, tag name also. So we can call it a node, or the better way of naming it is it's a tag. H2 is a tag, form is a tag, input is a tag. So I can call it a tag name, right? So it starts with the tag name and it ends with a tag name. Then this is a text node. Now HTML elements or a tag can have attributes also, like you see here, right? This ID equals to title. So this is a name, this is a value. So this is name of an attribute and this is value of that particular attribute. And we are going to see like how we can access elements using tag name. Even, we can access element using class names, and we can access element using classes. So there are multiple ways of accessing DOM elements, and we are going to see it one by one. So let's start with targeting HTML elements first, because first we need to have elements, then only we can manipulate those elements, right? I have written my script block here because, I need to access the DOM, and DOM should be ready before I execute any of my JavaScript code. So let's start with targeting elements. I'm going to write a comment for this. Okay, to access DOM, we have DOM API or DOM application program interface. A document object model has some methods which we can use to access the DOM element. So say suppose I want to access this H2 element, and it has this unique identifier ID equals to title. So I'm going to access this H2 using this ID attribute. So to do that, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it element, and we need to use this syntax document. So this document is nothing but our DOM, this part right here on the right hand side. So I'm saying DOM or document dot get element by ID. See that? So I can use this method to access any DOM element which has an ID. Like in our case, this H2 has an ID of title. If I go down, you see this unordered list, it has an ID of task. So this time I'm going to target this H2 with its ID, and its ID is title. So I'm going to pass that value as an argument here. So title, and I'm going to console log my element, save. See that? We got the H2 element as an output in the console window. It's really easy, right? So the first method, get element by ID, you just need to pass ID of an element, and it's going to return that particular element as a return value. So basically this get element by ID is a function of this document object. It takes some argument and it returns a value. one point I would like to mention about ID, these IDs should be unique throughout the page. So say suppose I have used ID equals to title for this h2 element. You shouldn't use this ID property once again like this. So for one HTML page, we should have a unique ID attribute. So if I have used a title here, you shouldn't use title once again. Maybe you can call it title1, something like this. So it's like a variable, once you define a name variable in JavaScript, you can't redefine that name variable once again. So I'm going to remove this for now. Save my program. It's working fine. Let's move on and talk about the next method. So I'm going to comment this just for your reference. Now let's talk about one more method where we can target the element using the class name. So like this UL here, or take the example of this LI, it has a class of task, right? Even our UL, this task list, has a class, task list. So we can target DOM elements using a method called getElementsByClassName. So I'm going to create a variable element, and I'm going to use a method document.getElement. Rather, it's elements by class name, because it might return multiple values to me, right? Because as I said, ID can be unique, but classes can have same value used for different element. So we can have a class of task used at multiple places. That's possible, right? So let me first target this task list and let's see what we get back. So I'm going to pass that class name here, task list, and I'm going to console log. I would rather rename this to elements. So I'm going to log elements and control S. See that? It actually returns HTML collection object. Even I have just one UL element here, but it has returned me an array. This HTML collection is nothing but an array, because JavaScript doesn't know, right? There can be multiple elements with this class name, right? That's why this function always returns an array. So, we can use this getElementsByClassName method to target all of our tasks, all of this li element, because they have this similar class name. So I can use this task here instead of task list. And now if I save, see that I got HTML collection with 4 different elements. First one, second one, third one, and the fourth one, because I have 4 different tasks here. So get element by ID when you want to target the element with an ID, get elements by class name when you want to target elements with a class name. Similarly, I have one more method. Let's talk about that. And again, I'm going to create elements, because I know this method also can return multiple objects. I'm going to use document.getElements by tag name. See that? So I'm going to target all of the list items in my page. So right now I have 4 LIs in my page, and I'm going to target that. So I want elements with tag name. So when we started this video, I told you different parts of this HTML element. So this is an element, and this element has a tag name of h2. This is also an element, and it has a tag name of form. This has a tag name of input. This has a tag name of button. right? Similarly, I'm targeting li element throughout my page using get elements by tag name. So now if I console.log elements, see that I got the collection once again. This is an array and I got all the 4 different tasks. When I hover on any of the tasks here in the console, it's getting highlighted on the top here, right? That's a good feature of the browser tools, you know. So we talked about 3 different methods: get element by ID, get elements by class name, and get elements by tag name. These are really useful method, but in the JavaScript community or in the JavaScript world, you know, they have added 2 useful methods. They are more intuitive if you compare with, you know, get element by ID or get element by class name or get element by tag name. And we are going to talk about those methods now. So I'm going to comment this one and let's talk about some query selector methods. So using the query selector methods, you know, you can achieve the 3 things which we have already discussed, like this get element by ID, get elements by class name, and get elements by tag name. So let's first try to achieve these 3 things using query selector method. So instead of using these 3 methods, you know, these are like old methods, I would say, and start using this more intuitive or new methods called query selector. So let's start with the query selector first, and I'm going to target by ID first. I'm going to create an element, and this time I'm going to call document.query selector. So there are 2 different methods, query selector and query selector all. First, I'm talking about query selector, and here inside this query selector function, I can pass some kind of query, you know. So you can imagine like I'm asking a question. So hey query, hey document, I'm passing this query to you. So say suppose I want to target that. So say suppose I want to target this h2 element with ID of title, right? I can do that using query selector method also. So I just need to pass that ID, but this time we need to use a special syntax called hash. So this is, you know, like a query. So I'm querying the document. I'm asking a document or a DOM, can you give me all the elements with the hash or with the ID of title? But this query selector is going to return me the first match element only. Okay, so if you want all the elements with the ID of title, which can't be the case, right? Because we can have only one title, but we are going to talk about class name. In that case, we can have multiple elements with a similar class name. There, this case will be applied. So just to keep things simple, you know, you just remember I'm querying a DOM using the query selector method, and this is my query. I'm asking return me the element with a ID of title, and this query selector is going to return me the first match element. Okay, so now I'm going to console.log element, save. See that we got the similar result if we compare with get element by ID. Now let's move on. Let's use query selector for targeting the classes. So I'm going to comment this one, and let's create a new element, because this is going to return me element only. Remember that this query selector method is going to return me only one element, and the first element. So I can again say document.query selector, and this time I want an element with a class name. So I'm going to target the task. So I'm asking document, give me all element with the class name of task. But we need to use a special syntax here for the classes called .task, because this is how we write classes in CSS, right? So this query selector is very much similar to CSS targeting only, like how we target HTML elements using CSS. So in case of ID, we use hash, and in case of classes, we use dot. I'm going to console.log element save. See that? I got one element and first one only with the text node of exercise. You see here, but I have other allies with the same class name. But as I said, query selector is going to return me first object only, first matched element only. Now let's see how we can target elements by tag name using query selector. So again, I'm going to create an element, and this time I'm going to say document.query selector, and I want, say, suppose h2 element. Okay, so for element we don't need to use any special syntax, we can just use the tag name, and I can console.log element save. See that we got the h2 element. So you can see, I can use just one method called query selector, which can do the job of get element by ID, get element by class name, and get elements by tag name, right? But the problem with query selector is, it returns me only first element. What if I want all the element? Like in this case, in case of task, it's a class. I need all the element with this class. So I can replace my query selector method with query selector all. So I'm going to copy this part just to save some time here, and I'm going to delete this. Now instead of query selector, I'm going to use query selector all, and now it's going to return me elements and not the element. So if I save, see that now I got node list. In case of get elements by class name, I got HTML collection. But something special happened here. In case of query selector all, we get an array of object called node list, and I got all of my tasks. See here? So when you want the first element, you can use query selector. When you want to search the entire DOM and get all the elements, you can use query selector all. And this is the area, this is the argument where you can pass the query. You're basically querying the DOM. And I want to tell you, there are different ways of querying DOM. I mean, this part can vary based on different situation, and there are so many different rules which you can use here. Like, I want to give you one example, of a complex rule which you can use here. So I'm going to copy this part only, and I'm going to paste it here. So this time, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use some kind of complex query here. So instead of directly targeting the task, first I'm going to target the task list, and then inside that all the task. See that? So now let me undo, Control S. Now what I'm doing, I'm targeting first the task list, I mean this UL element, and I'm asking for all the tasks inside this UL element. So this query is going to return me only element inside this class, right? Task list and task. So initially I asked for a task, so say suppose I have a h2 element with a task, it's going to return me that h2 element also. So for the time being, I'm going to put a class name of task here. Now if I save, I'm getting 4 elements, right? Because I'm targeting all the tasks inside task list. Now say suppose I remove this task list from here, and now if I save, see that I got 5 elements now, because it's querying the entire DOM and it's looking for this class name. So if you want to be more specific, you can use this kind of rules. I want task only inside task list. See that? Now I got only 4 elements. So whenever you want to query a DOM, I would suggest to use query selector and query selector all. These methods, these are the modern methods in JavaScript which are getting used nowadays for querying the DOM. I mean, you can use get element by ID, get elements by class name and tag name also. There is no problem in using all these methods, but these were like, old methods nowadays. And the most popular and most intuitive way of querying a DOM nowadays is using query selector and query selector all. Now we know how to access the DOM, right? How to access the elements. Now let's see how we can modify the elements inside our DOM. So first of all, we are going to start with modifying this text, this text node of the element. So say suppose I want to target this h2 element. Maybe I want to change this my task text to something else. I can do that using a property called inner HTML. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to use this code only. So I'm going to copy this, or maybe I'll rewrite. That's a good idea, it gives you more practice. So I'm going to target the h2 element using document.query selector, and I'm going to target the h2 element. Okay, so if I console.log my h2 element, so I'm going to say element save. We got the h2 element. Now I'm going to target this text node. So basically I'm going to use inner HTML property of the element, and I'm going to change this text. So if you want to see, what properties this element has, I can use this dir function of console, and we can check for all the properties and methods. So you see that I got so many properties and method, and inside that there is a property called inner HTML, right? It got the ID also, right? See title. So I'm going to target this property. I'm going to use this property inner HTML. Right now it got the value of my task. Let me try to change it. So I'm going to say element dot inner HTML is equals to, right now it is my task. I'm going to change it to today's tasks. Today's task. So let me save my program. See that? So we know how to access the DOM, but now we know how to modify the DOM, right? How to update the text node of our elements. So we have an inner HTML property, which returns the text node of a particular element. So this is a text node of this element, this h2 element. Maybe I want the entire h2 element to be replaced by something else. So for that, we got a property called outer HTML. Okay, so I'll show you. I'm going to console.log element dot outer HTML. So if I save this, see that this is the inner HTML, and the entire h2 element is called the outer HTML. So I can use this outer HTML property and I can replace the entire h2 element with something else. So I'm going to use that property outer HTML, and maybe I'm going to replace it with let's try to replace it with paragraph tag. Let's see how it works. And I'm going to change it to my task again and save. See that? Now let's see if it is a paragraph. If I go to body, header, yeah, it got replaced. Yes, it got replaced with the paragraph tag. See that? So you can use inner HTML, you can use outer HTML to modify the text node or even the entire element of the DOM. So we have talked about how to access the elements, right? Different methods and we talked about changing the text node and even the entire element with different values, right? Now there are other things which we can change, right? So like we can change this class name. So I can add new classes to this li element. I can remove this existing class, and even, you know, I can check whether a particular class name exists in this element or not. So there are some methods which are available for classes. There are some methods which are available for attributes, like this ID is attribute, right, of this particular element. So we have methods for getting the attribute, setting the attribute, and for checking the attribute, right? And even we can create our own HTML element using JavaScript. And we are going to talk about all these things in the next video, as this video is getting a bit longer. So I'm going to see you in the part 2 of Access and Manipulate DOM. Hey everyone, welcome back to the part 2 of Access and Manipulate DOM. So now we know how to change the text node of a particular element. Now let's see how we can target the classes. So we can add, we can remove these classes from the elements, and we are going to see that as a first thing in this video. So I'm going to write targeting classes. This was about targeting text nodes, I would say, or manipulating, actually, not targeting. And this is about manipulating classes. Okay, so let's first understand how I can identify which classes any of the element has. So obviously first we need to target this particular element, and then we can check for the classes. So I'm going to target this UL element, and I'm going to see how many classes this particular element has. So let's first target. So I'm going to comment this one for now, and I'm going to create a new elements variable. I'm going to use document.query selector, and I'm going to target my task list. Okay, now to see how many classes it has, we can use a property called elements.classList. So this class list property, you know, it contains all the classes applied to this particular element. So I'm going to log it. See that it has returned me again an array, and we can see it got only one class, that is task list, and the object type of this particular array item, you know, is DOM token list. So let's add one more class inside this. Maybe I'm going to add tasks class into it. Now if I save, see that now I got two different classes. So you can use class list property of an element to identify all the classes in that particular element. Now this class list property, you know, it's an object, and we know object has properties and methods. So if you see here, you know, this proto, inside this proto we can go inside and we can see which method it has. It has an add method, it has a contains method, it has item, keys, remove, replace. There are so many methods which we can use. So let's talk about, you know, like I have added a class manually here, you know. Let's see how we can add a class using a method. So I'm going to target this elements dot class list object, and I'm going to use a function called add. Okay, and I'm going to add that tasks class using this method. And let me move this from here to the next line. Save. See that tasks has been added using this add method. If I go back, you know, I don't have that task class. right? Now I'm going to show you one example, where we will see some changes happening in the DOM. So I have this index.css file which I'm going to open, and I'm going to add one class here called red, and I'm going to set one property inside it for background color of, say, suppose red. Okay, I'm going to save it. Nothing is going to happen because I didn't use this property yet. So now I'm going to add this red. So now I'm going to target this first li element, this first task, and I'm going to add a class to it. And you will see like the changes will happen on the runtime. So first of all, let me target the task element. I'm going to call it task element, and I'm going to use query document dot query selector only because I want the first element only, and I'm going to target the task. Okay, then I'm going to say task element dot class list dot add, and I'm going to add that red class. So now if I save, you just see here, oh, actually I forgot to remove the task class here in the h2 element. So let me remove this. Okay, now if I save, see that the first task has a background color of red. So you can do all of this, exciting things using all of these methods. Now we talked about this add method. Now say suppose I want to remove this red, right, which I have added, or maybe I want to remove the existing class like this task or this task list. Okay, or maybe we can try this, right? Let me add a class of task here. So now if I save, see the background of red is coming here. Maybe I'll try to remove that using task. I need to target that element, so I'm going to directly target that element. So I'm going to use query selector, and I'm going to target that h2 element using element tag only, and then I can access class list. So this is the other way I would say. I'm going to use the remove method, and I'm going to remove that red class. Now if I save, see that red color has been removed. So I have directly targeted using query selector, and I have accessed the class list property, and I have removed that particular class. So there are like different methods available in the class list object, as I said, so you can go and explore all those methods inside this proto property. Now we are not going to talk about a lot of methods. This add and remove are like, most popular method I can say, but there's one more method called contains, using which, you can check a particular class exists or not in that node. And there is one more method called toggle. This toggle method is used for toggling classes, so say suppose I have this task class, right? So I can toggle, means if I call class list.toggle task, it will remove this particular task class from this element, and when again I'll call a toggle method, it will add that task class inside this li element. So you can try all of these methods, they're really simple to use. You just need to use similar kind of pattern what I have used here. So let's move on and talk about, how we can change styles using a style property. So we can change all of the colors or, all of the style of our HTML element using a style property. So I'm going to comment this one for now. This is a CSS way or a class way of changing the element. Now let's talk about style property. So I'm going to start with an element, and this time I'm going to target my h2 only, document dot query selector, and I'm going to target the h2 element and I'm going to use element dot style. See that? This element is an object and this style is also an object, and it got all the properties, all the CSS properties available, and we can use those properties. So I'm going to change the color. So I'm going to target the color of this h2 element, and maybe I'm going to change it to red. See that? And say suppose you want to change the background color of this particular element, so you can use dot style object. Now background color has two different words, so I can't use this syntax, right? Because this is a minus sign and this is JavaScript. JavaScript is going to get confused. Okay, so you're trying to subtract element.style.background from color, or maybe you're trying to subtract color from, actually I would rather say you're trying to subtract color from element.style.background. This is not allowed, right, in JavaScript. So in this case you can use the camel case syntax. I can use element.style.background color is equals to, maybe I'll go with the gray color, and if I save, see that? So you can use this style property, and this is available for all the HTML elements, and you can target all and you can use all of the CSS properties here to manipulate the style of our DOM elements. So I need to correct the spelling here. So this is style property. Now we know how to change styles. I'm going to comment this code for now, and now we are going to talk about attributes, right? So our HTML element, we talked about it, it has attributes also. So this ID title is an attribute. Even this class is also an attribute. So let's see how we can target the attributes and we can modify those attributes. So first of all, let's see how we can read the attributes, and then we will try to change those attributes. So let me first target the h2 element, or rather I'll copy and paste this time. So I'm going to copy this one and paste it here. So now I'm targeting the h2 element, and first of all let me log. So I can say element dot get attribute. So there is a method called get attribute, and I can target the ID one. So this get attribute method, basically it requires the name of attribute. So it's going to return me the value of that particular attribute. So now if I save, see that? Our h2 element has an attribute called ID, its value is title. Similarly, I can target the class also. So maybe if I replace this ID with class, save, see that? So we can access all attribute. We can use this get attribute function of any DOM element to get the attributes. Now there is a way of setting the attribute also. So now I'm going to change this ID to some other values. I'm going to target element dot set attributes. I'm going to use set attribute method, and I'm going to change the ID attribute to something else. Right now I have ID of title. Let me change it to heading. Okay, so now if I save, and if we go to the elements tab, and if I search for the h2, see that attribute got changed. Cool. There's one more method I would like to talk about. Let's talk about console.log, and we can use something called element dot has attribute method to check whether that particular attribute exists in that particular element. So I'm going to target this element. I'm in my h2 element only, and I'm going to check for the href attribute here. Let's see what we get in the output. So I'm going to go into console and save my program. See that? Because my h2 element doesn't have that attribute, right? Which I'm targeting, the href attribute, but it has ID and class. So maybe if I ask for the class, I'm going to get back a true value. So these are some of the methods, which you can use for getting the attribute, setting the attribute, and even checking if that particular attribute exists in the targeted node or targeted element. Now let's move on to the very exciting part of how we can create the entire HTML or entire element using JavaScript. Now, the best and the recommended way of writing HTML is to use HTML and write the HTML, right? But sometimes, we need to create small elements, like in our case, when I'll enter something here, maybe I'll create a new task, and when I click on add one, we need to create one more li element to add it here, right? So such kind of small elements we should know how to create this small element and insert into another element, the parent element. So in such cases, we should have a knowledge of creating HTML elements using JavaScript. So let's see how we can create elements using JavaScript. So I'm going to write a comment, create elements using JS. Now let's first talk about how we can create HTML element using JavaScript. So in our case, say suppose I want to create a new task and append that task into my task list. So obviously I need to know how to create this li element, right? So let's create one more li element, but this time I'm going to use JavaScript. So I'm going to create task element, and to create an element we use document dot create element function, and we need to pass the tag name of that particular element. So in my case, I want to create a li element, so I'm passing li here, and this create element is going to return me an element. So let's log that element. So I'm going to log task element, control S. See that? I've created the li element, which is an HTML element, but right now it's empty because we don't have text in it. And as I told you, whatever we have inside here, this is called a text node. So now we have to create text node, and then we can insert that text node inside this task element. So for creating a text node, we have another function in JavaScript. So I'm going to call this variable task element or task text node. So document dot create text node. I mean, functions are really easy to remember, For creating an element, we have create element. For creating a text node, we have create text node. So I'm going to create a new text node with the value of, say, practice piano. Okay. And now how we can insert this text node inside this task element. So to do that, we have another method. So I'm going to use task element dot append child, because I want to insert this task text node. I want to insert this task text node inside the task element. So I'm using task element dot append child, and I want to append task text node. Now if I save, see that I got practice piano in my li element. So even if this console.log is before this statement, as this is an object. So, and we know objects are like references. That's why we were able to see that log there also. So I'm going to paste it here just to avoid the confusion. So see that we have a li element. Now we have a text in it, practice piano. And now we want to insert this task element into our list of tasks, right? So for that, I can target this UL. So let me use our, let me target that particular UL element to add this task element into it. So I'm going to use document.query selector, and this time I'm going to target with ID, maybe task dot append child, and this time I want to append my task element. And now if I save, uncaught type error cannot read property append child of null. Why it is saying like that? Document.query selector, I'm looking for a task. Let me see if I have a task element. No, it's tasks. So let me add S here. And now I'm going to save. See that? We got the practice piano task added. Later on, we will see how we can add this task using this add one button. But you understood, I have created task element, then the text node, then I have appended this text node in the task element, and finally I have appended that task element into my task UL. Now there is one more method, and I would recommend you can use that method also. Instead of append child, you can use append method. So, but you need to check for the browser compatibility of that method. So instead of append child, I would have used append, and this will work fine, right? So there are some differences between append and append child. Like this append, you can avoid this second step of creating a text node if you use append. So let me tell you how we can avoid that step. So I'm going to comment this part here. So instead of append child, I can use append, and I don't need a task. I don't need text node. In this case, I can directly say practice piano. I can reduce one step of creating this text node. I can use task element dot append and directly pass the string. Okay. Now if I save, see my program is working fine, right? I got the task here. So you can reduce this one step, using the append method. This is one of the advantage of append method. Let me revert my program for now, and let's get back to the initial stage. So using append method, you can append multiple nodes here. Like in append child, you can append only one node or one element, I can say. But if you use append method, you can actually append multiple nodes, something like this. So append has its own advantages. You can visit Mozilla Developer Network and you can see the comparison between append and append child. So I would suggest you can use append child also, you can use append also. Both the methods are powerful and you can use based on the requirement, So now, let me undo this. Our program is working fine. So now we know a lot about DOM and its API, or I would say DOM properties and methods. We know like how to target different elements. We know how to target classes, how to change classes, how to add classes, right? We know how to style our elements. We know different attributes, how to get attributes, how to set attributes, right? And we know how to create the HTML using JavaScript. I think we know a lot about DOM, but one thing which we don't know, that is called events. And we are going to talk about events in the next video. Hey everyone, in this video, we are going to talk about JavaScript events. Now the first things first, you must be thinking, what's an event? So you can think of events, as triggers. And based on these triggers, we can take some actions. And obviously action means function. So like I can give you a real world example. Maybe this wouldn't be a great example and you can create your own. But say suppose when you feel sleepy, right? You think of drinking coffee or some other drink, maybe. So we can say feeling sleepy is a trigger, right? To take some action. And in this case, that action is drinking coffee. Now you can relate this example, and you can create different example of your own. Similarly, we have HTML events which gets triggered when we do something with browser. So let's start with some of the examples. So I'm going to continue from the last video only. I have deleted some of the code from the script block. So some of the HTML elements, they have events like this body. This body can trigger an event. So let me start from here. Maybe I'll go to amazon.com and now this page is loading, right? See, now the page has been completely loaded. It started by hitting the amazon.com URL and loading that HTML part. So once the HTML file is completely loaded, I mean all of these images and all of the text, I would say, right? After entire HTML document has been loaded, our window actually triggers an event called load event, or we can call it onload event. Okay, so there's one more event. Say suppose I change the size of this window, right? So in this case also, this window is triggering an event called a resize event. So maybe when the window is resizing, you can take some action. So this is a trigger, right? This resizing of a window is a trigger. And based on this trigger, you can take some action. And those actions are nothing but functions. So we can write functions around these triggers. Let's talk about this input field. When I focus on this input field, it triggers an event called focus. So based on that trigger, we can take some action. Now, when I search for something here, and when I click on this button, click. So this click is also an event which triggers, and based on this particular trigger, we can take some action. And in this case, Amazon has given me the result of all of the iPhones. So there are so many events, which we can handle, which are triggered by the HTML elements. And we are going to talk about some of the important events in this video. So let's see what types of event this body element, triggers. So to check that, what I can do, I can console.log, or maybe I'll use dir in this case, and I'm going to target document dot body, enter. Now, if I go inside this body element, I can check for the events which body element triggers. So if I scroll down and down, event names, they have a special way of naming. They start with on. So you see here, this on abort, on after print, on animation, and these are all events. And we are interested in one of the event called onload. So I'm going to give you an example of this onload event. So if you remember, if I write this script block, maybe let me take this script block from here, and I'm going to move it on the top here. Okay. Now say suppose I want to target any element from the document. So I'm going to use document.query selector, and let me target this title. So I'm going to use ID selector here, paste, and now say suppose I say console.log this element. If I save my program Let me clear my console first. So I'm going to clear the console. I'm going to save my program and I'm going to refresh here. See that? Okay, I got console spelling wrong actually. So let me remove this O from here. Now I'm going to save. See that? I got null because I'm trying to access the document before it has rendered, right? This body element is not yet rendered. So how to handle such a situation? One of the way would be, I can move this script block at the end of the body here, but we can write similar code here also. For that we have event. So I need a trigger. I need a trigger from HTML document. Hey HTML, can you tell me once this body is entirely loaded so that I can take some action? And HTML has that trigger. This body element has that trigger and we call that trigger on load. So now this is a trigger or this is an event name. Now once the body is loaded here inside the browser, it's going to trigger an event called onLoad. So HTML is saying, or HTML body is saying, hey, my document is completely loaded. Do you want to do something? And that something is called a function. So I'm going to call a function here on document loaded. And I'm going to execute that function. So based on this event or a trigger, I want to call and execute this function. So let me copy this function and I'm going to write this function here inside my script block. And now I'm going to move this code from here inside this function. See that? Now if I save, we got the H2 element. See that? This is the beauty of events. So the body has triggered onLoad event, and once the document has been loaded into the browser, I can listen for an event and I can write a function. Now this is an action and this is a reaction, I would say. Understood how we can handle an event? So let's understand the terminology. This is an event name and this is an event listener. This is a function which we call an event listener. Now let's talk about one more event called a click event. And this is a very popular event. You're going to use it so many times while writing your JavaScript code. So, we have a button here, right? This button, add one button, right? So say suppose I enter some text here and if I click on add one, we need to add this task here. So before doing that, before performing that addition of task, let's understand a click event on the button element. So I'm going to target this button element and I'm going to give you one more example of event. So we can listen for on click event. And when I'm going to click on this button, the on click event is going to trigger. And after that trigger, I'm going to call this function. So maybe I'm going to call this function as on add one click. Okay. So I'm going to copy this function from here and I'm going to write it down inside my script block. And I'm just going to console.log for now. So let's log you clicked me, something like this. Now if I save my program, we got the H2 element. Now I'm going to click on this button. See that? We are not getting any output because of this form. This form has an on submit event and this button is triggering that particular thing. So for the time being, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take out this button from here just to make it simple, and later I'll tell you the solution, how we can handle that. So I'm going to save. And now if I click on this button, see that? You clicked me. Now coming back to the point why it was not working inside this form, I'm going to undo my code. This form has something called on submit event. So when I click on this button, somehow, this on submit event is getting triggered, and because of that, the form is getting refreshed. So I'm going to handle this using a simple function. So basically, inside this on submit event, I'm writing a function only, and that function is returning a falsy value. Now, if I write this statement, it's going to handle, now this is a JavaScript statement. It's going to handle the problem which we had previously. So I'm going to see my program, and now if I click, see that it's working fine. So this on click, focus on this on click event, not the on submit event. We'll talk about this event later, but this on click is an event which is available on the button, and button has a lot of other events also, or we can talk about all of these HTML elements, and those elements have different types of events. So, we can't learn all of the events in one video. Based on the requirement of your project, when you're working on particular task, you can search on Google and you can check for related event to your task, and you can use it. You just need to understand how we can write events. So this is one way of writing events in JavaScript. So this is an inline way. There's one more way I'm going to talk about, that is called using add event listener function. I mean, there is nothing wrong in using this way. You can use this way also, but this type of event handling has one problem. You cannot write it once again, something like this. So once you have an on click here, you cannot have it once again. So you can't write one more on click, something like this. And there is one more way we can. So before I move to add event listener, there is one more way through which you can handle event in JavaScript itself. This is HTML way. Let's talk about how you can handle events in JavaScript only. So I'm going to target this button. So I'm going to give it an ID of, say, suppose add button. Okay, I'm going to target this element. So obviously I need to write my code inside this on document loaded. So I'm going to remove this this code, and instead I'm going to write a new line of code here. So variable, I'm going to call it add button element, and I'm going to use query selector document.query selector all query selector actually, and I'm going to target this button which has ID of add btn. Okay, now once I have the button, I can add events like this. So I can write on click directly like this, and I can write function. So instead of having this one, so I'm going to remove this one for now, and I'm going to move this console log from here to here. Now if I save my program, and now if I click on my button, see that? This is another way of handling events, but we are handling events in JavaScript. And when I have written on click here, something like this, this is HTML way of triggering or handling an event. So as I told you, this has some disadvantages. I mean, if I have written add button element dot on click once, I cannot have one more event handler. So basically, we can have multiple event handler for a single event. How can we achieve that? And the best way of writing events, I would say, I'm not saying this is a bad way, but there is one more way, or I would say most popular way, is to use add event listener function. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to target my add button element, and there is a function called add event listener, which we can use to handle events. So this is a function, this is an object, this is a function, and I can pass arguments to the function. The first argument to this function is name of an event. Now there is a catch here. When I was writing like this way, I have used on click. But when I'm going to add event using add event listener, I'm going to use click, the name of the event. And the second argument is the event handler function. So I'm going to use this function only. So I'm going to call on add one click. And now if I save my program, but I'm going to change the console log. So you clicked me 1, I would say this, and you click me 2. I'm going to log for the second one. So I'm going to save my program. Now if I click, see that? You clicked me 1, you clicked me 2. So this event handler is also working and this event handler is also working. I mean, there will be rare cases, where you will be using multiple event handlers, but I just wanted to tell you different ways of, handling events in JavaScript. Now coming back to the point, right? We have started this to-do app, and we don't have a way where, I can add a task inside my task list. So let's see how we can achieve that. So I'm going to comment all of this code for now. I'll keep it for your reference, and let's add a task in our task list using this text input and this button. So first and most important thing, I need to get the value from this text input. And when I click on this button, I should take the value from here and add it into the DOM. So yes, obviously I'm going to use this part. So let me go the simplest way. So when add button element has been clicked, what am I going to do? Obviously, I'm going to target this input element. I'm going to take the value from it and I'm going to append that value inside this UL. Okay, so first of all, I need to target this input element. So I'm going to use document.query selector, and I'm going to use ID selector. I'm going to target the task input and I'm going to store it into input element variable. Next, let's see first of all how we can get the value from this input element. So we can use this input element. This is an object. It has a property called value. Okay, so let me save my program. I got add button element is not defined because I have written my code not inside this function. So let me copy this from here because the DOM is not available here. So let me tab it. And now I'm going to save. Element is not defined on document loaded. Why it is not defined? Yeah, I need to copy this one also. Sorry for that. So let me copy this one. Now it should be working fine. Save. Okay. Now I'm going to enter something, maybe practice piano. And now if I click on add one, see that? I got the value. Now we need to take this value and we need to append this value inside our task list, that UL element. So let's do that. Now we got the value. I'm going to use this value and I'm going to append here. So we need this UL for that. So I'm going to target that UL element using query selector, and I'm going to target task, right? And I'm going to write it on next line just to make it, just to have a good code formatting, and I'm going to use append function this time. And using append, I'm going to, or maybe I'll create an element directly and then I'm going to append it. So I'm going to create element using something called task element and document.create element. I'm going to create the li element and I'm going to use task element dot append function to append the input element dot value. So basically I'm creating the new element similar to this. Okay, and I'm taking the value from the input and I'm appending that value, that text value, into the task element. Now finally we are going to append this task element into this task UL. So I'm going to use append function only, and I'm going to append task element. Now if I save and let's test our program, I'm going to type practice piano and click on add one. See that? This is how you can add new task into your task list. So I hope you understood how we can handle events in JavaScript. There are multiple ways, we have seen like how to handle events using inline way, the HTML way, we have seen the JavaScript way. We have also seen how you can use the add event listener function also. Now, you can extend this program. Now I have created this to-do list just for adding a task. Maybe you can have a cross button or a delete button here. When you click on that delete button, it should delete a task. You can do all of those things, using events and writing this kind of JavaScript. So this is all about events, and I'm going to stop this video here only, and I'm going to see you in the next video.